Good morning, everybody. It is now 10 o'clock, and I welcome everybody to this morning's webinar. My name is Jason Flynn, and I am the Director of Human Resources and Client Services for PrestigePEO, and I am certainly happy to be spending some time with everyone this morning that is on the call today. So thank you for logging in and joining us. As for today's webinar, let me go through the topics that we will be talking about today, really focusing on, the future of the workplace and what businesses can expect as we head into what's going to be a brand new year. I guess what we hope is going to be a brand new and much different year. We'll also discuss the flexible work arrangements that have found their way into the fabric of our workforce, and also around those requests for accommodations, certain things, protections for employees, and how to, not just best handle them, but what really is available to not only protect employees, but employers. So as a quick reminder, as we normally do at the beginning of every webinar, you will be muted throughout the remainder of the webinar. However, if you do have a question, please use the Q&A feature within the webinar and direct the question to the panelists. We will do our best to answer all the incoming questions as we normally do, but as always, if there is something that we can't get to, we'll certainly reach out to you separately and to help answer your question. Also, a copy of the presentation will be available in the COVID Resource Center on the Prestige website following the webinar, along with a recording of today's presentation. So let's get into the future of the workplace landscape. In order to find out where we're going, in the future, it's really important to understand where we came from. Right? Uncertainty has certainly become the norm in 2020, unfortunately, and probably even more so as we move into 2021. Now, employers and employees are trying to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and its evolving needs in a time when safety is at its most importance. So businesses were really forced into an unfamiliar situation. Earlier in this year, now we're starting to get a little bit closer to normalcy, but obviously we're not quite all the way there yet. And now we're starting to revert back to where we were earlier in the year with the surge of cases, starting to shut down offices again. Fortunately, there's a bit more resistance to shutting down businesses in certain areas, which is good and bodes well for the economy in that respect. But nevertheless, it's definitely a step back before we take those steps forward. The far-reaching effects of the pandemic and what it's had on our country, our society, our economy, even our social structure has been like nothing we've ever seen. I'm sure we can all agree on that one. So let me take you through some areas that have been greatly impacted by the pandemic as we go down this list here. First, we have the safety and security of our employees. Safety and security, employee protections, workplace rights, as you see on the slide right here, as it relates to your employees, has certainly changed. We've discussed this at different times during these webinars, but your human capital, your employees, are your most important and your most expensive assets. Right? And much of what we've done, what we've prepared for since April, has been in support of keeping our employees safe and secure. Right? How many different procedures and protocols and policies did we change and put in place just for the sheer purpose to help protect employees, keep them safe, but also thinking about their mental well-being also. Employers have been left with this strenuous task of keeping their employees safe from a virus while maintaining a presence within the workplace to some degree. Think about how difficult and challenging that is. I know you don't have to think about it because you've been through it, but trying to keep people away from a virus and in the office around other people, it just doesn't sound like it goes together, right? So the leadership, your leadership, everyone's really has gone to great lengths to create new policies and procedures in this vast time of uncertainty. And all with the understanding, with the hope, that these protocols will be temporary, because that would mean that the pandemic is ending. But as of now, this is our new reality. And even when the pandemic ends, it should be a history lesson on what we learn and probably maintain and keep many of the protocols that we've initially put in place, quote unquote, temporarily. But next on this list, we have our old laws, our current laws, and how that translates to these new situations. Now, we've spent many years complying with the ever-changing legal landscape that helps to protect our organization as well as our employees. These laws and regulations were created based on decades of pre-pandemic ideas and ideals. Now, there are many new situations that employers need to be aware of, be aware about, and honestly prepare for. Did it ever occur to you, or did it ever enter your mind that it would be okay or even legal to take an employee's temperature to allow them to enter the workplace, right? Of course not. You know, that and many other precautions employers are taking to protect their employees are only really allowed during a public health emergency. But it's almost crazy to think about some of the measures that we're taking in normal times. There's no way that would fly. Also, the remote working environment has really turned things upside down as it pertains to laws and employee protections that employers have been guided by for ages. You know, this is a brand new territory that we've entered into, and the fray on that is something that we truly need to think about, right? So with little time to prepare, employers were forced to apply laws to situations that never previously existed. Wage and hour laws, protections from discrimination, public safety, health requirements, you know, all of these types of things needed to be adapted to the shifting workplace norms. Employers truly had to figure out what they are able to do, what they can do now, and in the future to continue to comply with the letter and the spirit of these laws. Then we move on to flexibility. This is something that we're going to talk about quite a bit today. And from what we can see, what we've been learning, flexibility in the workplace is likely here to stay, at least in some fashion or another. Now, many organizations say that flexibility in the workplace obviously is going to remain, and that it does benefit the employer as well as the employee. So, as I mentioned, we are going to talk a little bit more about this further along within the webinar, but businesses are realizing that work can happen anywhere. You know, this can happen anywhere. Productivity doesn't necessarily need to be lost in connection with it. And even more so, an expanded talent pool will enable stronger and more capable work teams to exist now and in the future. This is going to open up other doors as well. That's going to help out employers. Independent contractors and unemployment, this is another interesting case, and it's something that we tackle a lot here at Prestige. One topic that seems to come up often, even in pre-pandemic times, is the discussion on whether a worker is an independent contractor or an employee. You know, or we are, as HRBPs here at Prestige, we're often approached to provide guidance on if a worker even qualifies as an independent contractor, or if the employer would be compliant if a particular worker is hired as an independent contractor or a 1099 employee. You know, now there are a lot of benefits to be gained when working as an independent contractor that workers or people are drawn to, right? This includes such things as arranging your own flexible work schedule, or having the ability to work for multiple companies or multiple jobs, right? There are benefits to that, and the more and more we see this currently and in the future, there is a draw to be, you know, a freelancer, a consultant, or so. Again, in these uncertain times, independent contractors have taken a hit, which is forcing the Department of Labor to look into the employment status a bit deeper. So as many listening are probably aware, independent contractors generally aren't entitled to certain employee benefits. You know, this includes things such as minimum wage, overtime pay, unemployment compensation benefits, you know, things like that. Now, The federal government has temporarily allowed contractors to collect unemployment benefits through the end of the year, and they did this as a way to support more workers during this pandemic. And that's something that I can certainly get behind. I support that. So there was some relief there for independent workers, even though it may be temporary. But I'll tell you right now, it's kind of tugging on the strings of that conversation. Right? The different requirements around federal and state laws about independent contractors can be very confusing. Again, this is something that we here at Prestige guide on quite often, and rightly so. There's a 20-point test. There are many different checks and balances to make sure that we are classifying an employee, that an employer is classifying an employee in the correct and appropriate way. Otherwise, penalties and fines could be hefty. And the reality is that it puts employers who want to hire independent contractors in a precarious and potentially dangerous and expensive position. So as I mentioned, they are confusing. The laws can be very difficult to navigate around, and as a result, employers may just choose to make everyone W-2 employees, right? It's just easier. Just forget it. I don't want to be in trouble. I don't want to have to pay any penalties. I want to make sure I'm doing, it's just not something I want to deal with. We'll just make them W-2 employees. You know, the problem with that is what we've seen is that it could be limiting you in the talent pool, right? Because if there is talent out there that does want the freedom and flexibility to be a consultant, and you are exploring that, but you're going to kind of discount that because it's just a pain, then it could limit you. So let's talk about what is new with this, right? Now, more changes may be coming down the road for determining independent contractor status. The Department of Labor in the U.S. did propose a new rule back in September that would adopt an economic reality test, right? So if this new rule is finalized, the proposal would make it easier to classify workers as contractors. That's a good thing. Conversely, right now, the DOL, as I mentioned, makes it very difficult to check off all those boxes, and you do need to check off many, if not all of those boxes. So it will be interesting to see how things pan out as this new presidential administration is coming into power. You know, we do know that President-elect Joe Biden supports a broader definition of what a quote-unquote employee is. So there is the expectation that he could withdraw the DOL's proposal, but that's something that we're keeping an eye on and something that should pop up relatively soon in the future. Finally, let's move on to our last bullet point here, which is the shift to remote work. I'd like to say it's the elephant in the room, but the reality is everybody's kind of, you know, knee-deep in the remote work situation now, and if not right now, then definitely at some point between April and right now, this is something that you've had to deal with. This is one of the most dramatic changes we've seen since the start of the pandemic, and that's the shift to the remote work environment. It really touches on a lot of different areas. Do employees have the technology in place to effectively set up a remote work environment? Do employees have it? You know, will employees be just as effective at home as they are in the office? You know, these are all valid questions, and those two or three are probably the more important ones. What I'd like to do now is to take everyone through the idea of remote working a little more and show you some of the trends that we see taking place as we move into 2021 and beyond. So as I move to the next slide here, titled Future of the Workplace, the Trends. This is what I want to spend some time on right now. And before the pandemic arrived, employers were really just dipping their toe into the remote work waters, right? These are things that, and we can see this, you know, forget about what you're reading, what you see in the news, all the articles, you know, even here at Prestige, we see it more and more. We're creating policies, answering questions, trying to set up the right protocols for clients that are exploring this idea of remote work because, you know, on one side of the line, they want to provide that flexibility. They want to do more for their employees as it comes up more and more. The other side of the line is it's hard to give up that control. It's hard to give up that, you know, that supervisory capacity to make sure that work is getting done. And it's just not what we're used to. So again, employers wanted to provide a bit more flexibility, but not let things get out of control. That's really where things were. There was some hesitation to putting remote work policy in place, but the shift was already starting. That wave was coming, even if it was a slow wave. Now, of course, COVID-19 pushed the fast forward on that button and made the decision for everybody. Fortunately, it's been a great case study in the effectiveness of working from home that we can use to help make those decisions in the future. I know, not everybody is going to have the perfect experience with remote work, and I've definitely spoken to some of you, maybe even on this call, about some of the challenges that you have run into. Naturally, not all positions, not all industries are going to be able to take advantage of the remote work option because it's just not. I can't fabricate something from my home. I can't sell someone a pair of jeans in the store from my home. There are just certain things that are going to limit certain businesses, and there's an understanding on that. And there clearly will be a shift back to brick and mortar. That setup that we're all accustomed to. I mean, we have to. So, but we are left with our options. And not only are we left with options, but we are now more prepared for those options. So as we get into the remote work option, the environment that constitutes the remote work, we start talking about how, employees working from home will be one of the biggest trends for businesses in the coming years. Yes, things should start to normalize as we move closer and closer to 2021 and beyond, as the vaccine is distributed and gets administered, but a lasting impression, mark my words, will be left on the office environment as we knew it. I found this interesting. A survey conducted by Gartner, Inc. And for those of you who are aware or not aware, Gartner, Inc. is a research and advisory firm based out of Stamford, Connecticut. But a survey that they conducted showed some pretty staggering numbers as it relates to employers continuing to support the remote work concept. Let's take a look at what we have on the slide here, these first 3 bullet points. A large majority of executives, 82% to be exact, say they intend to let employees work remotely at least part of the time. Then we get to nearly half, 47%, say they will allow employees to remote work full-time. Number 3 says 36% of those companies state that they are willing to hire workers who are 100% mobile and live anywhere in the U.S. or internationally. Just to give you an idea for comparison's sake, only 12% were receptive to that idea before the pandemic. And I think that's pretty telling. That's a small number that were open to that before everything kind of hit the fan. And those numbers really tell a compelling story about where things are moving. So at the end of the day, employees have enjoyed a lot of this new flexibility. It doesn't come without its challenges or its concerns. It's been a crazy, difficult year. But as I mentioned, employees have been able to enjoy the flexibility while employers have been able to continue to manage their business effectively for the most part and less expensively with employees being out of the office. And since remote employees can literally live anywhere, it will also introduce a wider pool of potential job candidates. And again, we spoke about this a little bit earlier. So if you are still on the fence about which way to go as we start to come out of this, there is a lot of great data that supports the benefits of having employees work remotely. Next, let's move on to health and safety factors. This certainly obviously cannot be ignored. It's in our face every day. We've discussed this numerous times during these webinars and have even dedicated a section of our PrestigePEO website to helping employers implement proper protocols around health and safety for their employees. We want to make sure you're prepared. We want to give you the checklists, the policies, and then provide you that on-site, or at least on-call support through the Prestige support system. COVID-19 pushed companies to wrestle with the health and safety issues, obviously like they've never had to do before. Not only have they reconfigured their workplaces to prevent infection, they've also had to grapple with how to address the pandemic's toll on your employees' physical and mental health and well-being, right? That's no small feat. COVID-19 humbled, I'd like to say everybody, and it really put everyone on a level playing field, relatively speaking. Employee health and safety in all industries truly became a #1 concern. And we spoke about this a little bit, I think, back in August when we had our National EAP, our Employee Assistance Program, our partner, join us and talk more about the mentality and the mental well-being of our employees and certain things that what we can do. This is a focus that should remain, especially this year. So, and again, I want to be clear, we're not just talking about those occupations that we know for being dangerous. We're talking about people who sit at their computers all day. I'm one of them. That's me, right? So, and I'm sure many people on this call today. Many people across many different jobs and industries, unfortunately, have landed in the hospitals, in the ICU, after contracting this horrible, horrible virus, right? And now, after all this time, it's pretty interesting. It's pretty commonplace for employees to return to their workplaces wearing masks, practice social distancing, cleaning and sanitizing, even submitting to temperature checks. And it's amazing how commonplace this does come for everybody, right? Just the other day, I'm online at a store and 6 feet away with my mask on, and I say to the person 6 feet in front of me, as I have to talk a little louder through the mask and so far away, but I ask them, I'm like, it's normal to stand 6 feet away from people right now. It doesn't feel weird. It's actually kind of nice, to be honest with you, but it makes me think, were we on top of each other before this pandemic? And the reality is, yeah, think about it. When you went to the store, you go to the grocery store, you're bumping elbows with everybody. So it's interesting and also nice to see how we as people can adapt to these different types of situations. So anyway, the concerns, just to move on with this health and safety factors, the concerns really have extended beyond employees' physical health or being used to standing 6 feet away from people. The pandemic, the recession, even the social unrest that we've experienced, it's all lumped together, but it's caused anxiety and depression and stress in the general population. So as a result, many companies have instituted and promoted employee assistance programs, just like I mentioned a little bit earlier, and increased the number of paid sessions with mental health counselors, even going so far as waiving or lowering co-payments. These are all different types of tools that we can offer our employees to help them get through these times. All right, so on to number 3. All right, this is where we're seeing different types of things. Workers, they are demanding better treatment for themselves. They are focusing on their communities. These are things that we're seeing as well. Employees have found their voices. That's a good thing, right? Like with the importance of health and safety for employees, workers are going to start demanding better treatment from their employers. Just this year alone, thousands of workers at companies that are all too familiar to everybody on this call, McDonald's, Target, Amazon, as well as numerous hospitals, and I'm sure you've seen them, have staged strikes this year to protest unsafe working conditions amid the pandemic. All right, we're certainly not immune to strikes and protests. We've seen them before, but this is something we've been seeing more and more, And you'd think that the employee demonstrations would be around wages, around employee pay most of the time. But the reality is that the employees are demonstrating for various different issues, not just wages, not just pay, not just benefits. And this signals that employees are expecting more from their employers, right? Just to give you a couple of examples. Last year, Amazon employees walked out over the company's climate policies. With moving on to Wayfair, if you're familiar with the company Wayfair, workers left the company facilities over sales of furniture to immigrant detention centers in the U.S., So it's not just around employee pay or benefits. There are a lot of issues, a lot of social issues that employers are very passionate about, and they want to make sure they're treated in the right way. So, the last little tidbit on this number here is that according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, work stoppages are on the rise, and not just in a small way. So it's something to also factor into the decisions that we make going down the line. And that brings us to the last bullet point on this page, which is the advancement in technology and how it relates to our employers. So as technology continues to rapidly advance, this is forcing companies to rethink how to integrate people with the appropriate technology and tools. The pandemic has forced employers to adopt and provide more digital and automated solutions practically overnight. The idea behind this is that organizations want to limit the human interaction to stop the coronavirus, right? So think about that. We want to limit human interaction to stop the coronavirus. That's definitely going to present some challenges as we're continuing to look how to staff our organizations. So as a result, one area that's expected to grow enormously in the future is companies' use of virtual and augmented reality as fewer employees work at the same location. Companies are already starting to use this type of technology for training, telemedicine, team building events, and it's only expected to grow. So as companies start implementing these new ideas, the increased use of technology will probably eliminate jobs. And what that means for companies is that they'll need to retrain employees and prepare them for new tasks and new responsibilities. So that's kind of a glimpse of what we're seeing for the future of the workplace, the type of trends that we are feeling that we're heading into. At this point, I want to shift over to what we can do with employees that are with us right now, how we can work with them, how we can accommodate them, and it's you see the word flexible work on the screen, but there's a lot to unpack with flexible work. And I'm going to take you through it right now. So flexible work is really this fast evolving idea that's quickly becoming a major option for organizations. The COVID-19 pandemic really fell in our laps earlier this year and has placed different types of flexible work arrangements and options, especially telework and remote work, into the spotlight. We continue to see different states exploring different stay-at-home orders, which help to curb the spread of the virus. In most cases, it means that only essential businesses are allowed to keep their physical locations open, thus forcing themselves, to implement flexible work options to keep things moving along. There will come a time, hopefully very soon, where social distancing orders will be lifted, businesses will reopen for good. That's the end game. That's where we want to go. I didn't mean to throw in an Avengers reference, but it is the end game. However, employee requests for flexible hours and remote work arrangements may be part of the new normal. I expect it to be part of the new normal. Now that many employers have experienced how successful remote work can truly be for their company, offering flexible work arrangements may be even more commonplace as we move along. So as you can see on this slide here, I have a number of different things I wanted to kind of explain what they mean. There are several different types of schedule flexibility that can be implemented by employers. And I urge you to kind of take a look at these different types of options and see if it is something that works within your organization that you can implement more in the future. Again, not all the options are going to work for everybody. Not all types are even manageable or even worthwhile for all sizes and types of organizations. So if an employer is considering a flexible work schedule arrangement, they definitely should go through an organizational assessment to determine whether and what kind of flexible scheduling will meet your needs. That just makes sense. So let me take you through the options that we're looking at here on this slide. The first thing that we're coming across is flex time. Flex time is a work policy that allows an employee to alter their start and end times of their workday. So Instead of the traditional 9-to-5 workday, some employers give their employees the freedom to create their own schedule as long as it meets their established goals. Interestingly enough, flex time is one of the top non-traditional benefits that employers do offer currently today. Compensation, career mobility definitely still have a seat at that table when it comes to benefits that we offer. But workplace flexibility is a key reason why employees and candidates identify for taking the role or staying in the role. So we find that flexibility does help to reduce the stress and burnout with employees as well, and contributes to a decrease in unplanned absences. There are benefits for the employer as well as the employee. Moving down to the compressed work week. Another one that I've started to hear more and more from different organizations. A compressed work week is an alternative scheduling method that allows an employee to work a traditional 35 to 40-hour work week in less than the traditional number of work days. So for example, employers implement a 4-day work week of 10-hour days. Employers get the same number of working hours, but employees have a 3-day weekend every week. All right, that's another very effective option that I've seen. Shift work, this refers to a work schedule that's performed in rotations, right? An example would be while some employees might fill a role during the day, others might work at night or early morning shifts. What this means is that the company is in operation for 24 hours a day. You have some employees working various 8-hour shifts throughout the week while others work all their hours for a week within a 3-day stretch and then have the next 4 days off. Yes, this clearly might not work for every business. Totally understand that. Again, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Shift work has traditionally been used in manufacturing environments, but more recently, it's been more prominent in the 24/7 service economy, which is really just a byproduct of globalization, right? So, moving down to part-time jobs. This is probably the most traditional of all the flexible scheduling options that we have out there, and I think we all know what this entails. I don't need to spend a ton of time on part-time work. The option is typically used when a job requires fewer than 40 hours of work per the week. All right, the benefits that surround part-time work is that it can attract a staff that includes students, parents of young children, older workers, and really anyone else that needs to work but doesn't wish to work a full-time schedule. So the benefit really is that it's opening up your talent pool to more areas. It is traditionally or commonly associated with jobs in the retail or food service industry, but again, it's not so uncommon for really any employer to have part-time workers. Then we move down to the last bullet point here on this slide, which is job sharing. Now, this is the practice of having two different employees performing the tasks of one full-time position. So with this scenario, each of the job sharing partners works a part-time schedule, but together they are accountable for the duties of one full-time position. What makes this option attractive is that the job sharing allows for part-time schedules and positions that the employer would not otherwise offer on a part-time basis. So like part-time jobs, job sharing may appeal particularly to students, parents of young children, and also employees nearing retirement, so it does open up that talent pool and also offers that flexibility, helping to retain that talent. And that's really what we're after. Again, I'll go back to it. Your employees are your most expensive and your most important asset. So anything we can do to gain good talent and retain them is, it's my number one priority. So I'm going to move on to the next slide and, continue to really just continue on with that idea that the economy is going to start to reopen and what that means for the future. All right, so soon, if they haven't already, HR departments and leadership teams are going to have to revisit and in a lot of cases look at their remote work policies to determine what will look like, what work will look like, and what it should look like. Again, as we've discussed, it's hard to imagine what going back to the normal work environment as things were pre-COVID will look like. So the statistics that we do see, though, are showing that there is a growing support for policies that allow flexible work arrangements. And this is where we're going to really round out, this slide to see the flexible work arrangements and how it kind of affects different organizations. Now, most of these webinars come from the perspective of the employer, right? That makes sense. We're here to help, our employers move on and handle their employees and do the things that they need to do to be effective, especially within these trying times. However, these decisions will have major implications for the employee as well. So for the rest of this section here, as we wrap things up on this slide, let's take the perspective of the employee. First, as the employee, it's important to figure out what your flexible work arrangement is going to look like, right? And this part of the conversation here is really just based around the idea that an employee is taking a seat back, taking a seat and saying, I'd like a flexible work arrangement. I'd like to know how to go about that. What do I need to do? What do I need to prepare for, right? Also great for employers because it kind of lets you understand what you may be met with from employees that are looking to have a conversation around this. So as I mentioned earlier, it's important for the employee to figure out what their flexible work arrangement is going to look like. When breaking down what their needs are, they really should be focusing on 3 different areas: where they will work, when they will work, and how they will work. With many employees concerned about safety during this period of reopening, as we keep going back and forth, discussing these flexible work arrangements is going to be a major topic of conversation. For a lot of you on this call, well, it already has been. But when considering where the employee will work, the employee is really going to need to start with, do I have a home office? Do I have the proper technology set up? Do I have a space that's free from disruption? That might be the tough part, with children, with, your pets, your puppies. The disruption part is hard, but it's all a work in progress. Now, on to considering when you work. This one should be easy because the hours could technically remain the same. However, the 9-to-5 work schedule could also be restrictive for some employees with their personal lives. With more organizations open to flexible work schedules, there could be an opportunity to shift the hours on the workday, meaning you could start work earlier or log in at night after the kids are in bed. Naturally, the flexibility is going to depend, or it's going to vary depending on the industry and job function, and shifting work hours really might not be an option for a lot of different businesses, but it is something to think about. Then we get into how you will work. Just like in the typical office environment, the employee is going to need to understand their strengths, their weaknesses, and their preferences. Self-motivation and discipline are going to be necessary in order to stay on task and be successful with this remote environment. So then at the end of it all, when you're ready to have this conversation with your manager, it's important that you research company policy first and have an understanding on what the company practice has been. That's from the employee perspective. From the employer perspective, if you're anticipating these conversations, this is why it's important to have a policy and a practice in place that you can lean on while having these conversations. I don't think it's a stretch to say that people on this call and a lot of managers that we see might be more open to talking about flexible work arrangements, but the employee needs to be prepared. Otherwise, the conversation is a game stopper. So it's important to show the proper preparation when asking for really any type of accommodation, but especially one in an unsupervised environment. And this takes us to our last point here, which is to formulate a plan. It's perhaps the most important task, and that's you'll need a plan to show how your flexible arrangement is going to work for you. It's important to know that you should be prepared to address and respond to questions or concerns from management around certain aspects of your plan. If you're asking to work from home a couple days a week, you might be asked about how you'll stay connected with everybody and with your managers. If you're asking to leave early every day to take your kids or pick up your kids to work, pick up your kids from school, you might be asked about if you have a backup plan for when something urgent comes up. These are all contingencies that we need to talk about. So really, as organizations slowly start to pull back from crisis mode, many of them will use this as a moment, as an opportunity to experiment with new ways of working. Employees should do the same. Absolutely. They should look into these types of arrangements, put themselves in a good position to take advantage of the opportunities when they do arise, and have those conversations with their management. So the point is, just to really kind of tie things up, flexible work schedules in some fashion, they are going to remain as we move into the future. Reverting back to your pre-COVID practices and being inflexible could limit you, could limit your talent pool and the employees that you attract to your organization, even the ones that you keep. So it's important to keep things open. Now, you may see a couple of large corporate names on the right side of this slide. These are all very large organizations that are currently pushing forward with different types of flexible work arrangements. And I thought it was appropriate to kind of talk about what some of the very large organizations are already trying to do. Google, if we want to tackle this one first, they've recently delayed their return to the office and are planning to test out a flexible work week. This is really uncharted territory for an organization of this size, but their hope, and this is according to their CEO, is that the flexible work model will lead to greater productivity, greater collaboration, and overall mental well-being for their employees. Now, CBS and Viacom, who recently merged together, they have more than 20,000 employees, and what they're looking to do is have 70% of their employees working at least partly from home. Their thought process is that the move towards the hybrid model will allow more flexibility, but also has its financial advantages. The part-time remote work environment will help to reduce their real estate footprint and keep their controlled. So there are different things that also benefit the employers as well. And finally, in October, Microsoft released a blog post, which was authored by their Chief People Officer, and it was titled, "Embracing a Flexible Workplace." This included more guidance on an adaptable work site and work hours and work location. So like with many companies, they've learned a lot about productivity and flexibility over the past few months. So much so that flexibility in working schedules is really now considered the standard for most roles within Microsoft. So just to put a bow on this section, flexible work arrangements may continue to grow and become part of the new normal from what we see right now and moving into the future. Should you look into these types of arrangements or flexibility, I'd suggest assessing your employees, assessing your organization. Do that first, and then put some very strong policies in place. This is going to help keep the focus on productivity while giving the organization the ability to monitor and adapt moving forward. That kind of rounds down the flexible work idea. Before we wrap things up with the presentation I've put together for everybody today, I did want to take just a couple minutes here to go through some of the accommodations in the workplace. Right? Clearly, we've spent a lot of time this morning discussing accommodations such as remote work, flexible work schedules, among other things. But other accommodations are the employer protections under the ADA. Right? And not just for employees, but also for employers. And it's something that we don't touch on a lot. From a support perspective within Prestige, it's something we touch on all the time. But from the webinars, we've always typically taken a different approach to it. But I definitely wanted to touch on these and give a little bit of guidance from what we see from the organizations that we do support. So the EEOC, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with. It's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, enforces workplace anti-discrimination laws. The EEO laws, which include the ADA, the Rehabilitation Act, continue to apply during this time of the pandemic, during the time of COVID-19. But like many federal and state regulations, they've gone through a lot of major changes to reflect the challenges that we've been through, the challenges that we've seen over the course of the year since, really march on. So let's quickly talk about what a reasonable accommodation is. Under the ADA, a reasonable accommodation is an adjustment or a modification provided by an employer to enable people with disabilities to enjoy equal employment opportunities, right? That's the textbook definition of what it is. If a reasonable accommodation is needed and requested by an individual with a disability, the employer must provide it unless it would pose an undue hardship. What that means is that it provides a significant difficulty or expense for the employer. An employer has the discretion to choose among an effective accommodation. What that means is that you're not beholden to the accommodation that's being requested by the employee. There is a level of discussion and compromise that goes into that. It basically means it has to work for the employee and the employer. Right? So there's no requirement to provide exactly what the employee is asking for. As long as the employer enters into an interactive process with the employee to discuss the request, everything is gravy. Now, you may also be in a situation where an employee was already receiving a reasonable accommodation prior to the pandemic. Now, they're coming to you and requesting an additional or altered accommodation because of the pandemic. In this situation, the employee may be entitled to an additional accommodation because of the pandemic and what it's brought on for their existing type of condition or existing type of accommodation. But like with any interactive process, the employer may discuss with the employee whether the same or different disability is the basis for the new request and why the new accommodation is needed. Right? So interactive process, that's something that we say often. You'll hear me say it probably again. In keeping with the spirit of preparing your office to reopen, what about asking employees, and of course this is prior to the office reopening, what about asking employees for what reasonable accommodations they may need in the future when they are permitted to return to the workplace, right? This is a proactive measure, right? It's a great proactive measure to have. And of course, employers may inform their staff that employees with disabilities may request accommodations in advance that they believe they may need when the workplace reopens. So there are a number of protections. I cannot possibly go through them with you all. It would take us a long time. But there are a good deal of protections and guidance, not just for employees, but also for employers to follow. And I just wanted to take a couple minutes here to point out a few of the more pertinent ones and draw your attention to the guidance provided by the EEOC. And that wraps up the material that I wanted to go through with everybody today. Again, I truly appreciate the time you spent with me today. I hope you found the information I presented to you useful. And as always, please lean on your support staff here at PrestigePEO for any questions or policies and creations that you may want to put in place from an organizational perspective. If you are unaware, I know our Insights newsletter went out yesterday. There's a lot of great information in those newsletters, and I do want to draw your attention to the website that we've put together and the resources that we put on for everybody to really draw off of. So again, thank you everybody for joining what is our last webinar of 2020. If I don't speak to you before the end of the year, I hope you have a wonderful holiday, and I'm looking to speak with everybody soon. Take care.